Welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. This is episode 48, a slightly more laid back episode today. We're going to be looking at all things animal related in the news and things like cryptozoology, animals in space, animal ESP, that kind of thing. In Astana, Kazakhstan, there are 60,000 dead antelope wiped out in a few days and no one's perfectly sure why. Could it be some virus? It's a mystery. We're going to be looking at dogs in the early space program, spy dolphins, cryptozoology, are there undiscovered animals out there? We're going to be talking to Anthony, and we're going to be talking to Hunter Shea, an amateur cryptozoologist who's also a horror writer about animals that some people believe are real and some people aren't quite so sure. We'll be touching on subjects like Plum Island, Operation Paperclip as well. Plum Island, by the way, for those who are unfamiliar, an island which since the 50s has been apparently protecting America's livestock from animal diseases. But some people believe there's lots of biological weapons being created there, and there's a lot more nefarious things going on, maybe with some animal experimentation. And we'll be talking about the Montauk monster later, which some people believe may have originated there. First of all, what do you think this sound is? That's not my stomach rumbling. That sound is known as the bloop, maybe an undersea creature that's yet to be discovered. The bloop was an ultra low frequency, powerful underwater sound detected by the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, I should have just said that, in 1997. There could be all kinds of sea creatures out there with so much of the ocean unexplored. What about the animals above ground? Are there any animals out there that are undiscovered? I'm thinking of things like the Mokele Umbembe. Numerous expeditions have been undertaken to look in the Congo to find this unidentified dinosaur-like creature, which some people believe they have seen, living in the Congo River basin. How do animals deal with space travel? This is something that's going to become a very real question in the coming decades. Also, do they have any extra senses that we don't possess? Can we learn from them? Can they warn us about impending disaster? Let's check in with our cat travel expert, Carla Francis, who's written a book about pet travel and also has a website. Welcome to Truth Sentinel, Carla.
Hi, good day.
Good day. And can you tell us a little bit about your guidebook and your website?
Yeah, so the book covers mostly the eastern coast of Australia, and it's where people can holiday with their pets, so that could be dog, cat, bird, horse, or anything else.
You've travelled widely with your cat, I believe, and a lot of people do put off travelling internationally because they think their cats might not be able to deal with it. How have you found your cat Gershwin has dealt with international travel?
Well, he didn't particularly like the long haul flight, because obviously flying from Japan to Sydney was about a 10-hour flight. But as soon as he arrived in Australia, he kind of settled in quite quickly, found him food that he liked, and he settled in quite well.
Later on, we're going to be talking about cats, dogs, other pets in general, just travelling into space. And this is going to become more and more prevalent in the next sort of coming decades. But also, I just wanted to ask you, what do you think an animal like a cat or a dog might feel when they're going into space and they're not really sure what's happening? I mean, comparing it to cats on planes, they're not really sure what's going on either. How do you feel like the first dogs in space might have felt experiencing that?
Well, I'm sure they'd be terrified. I mean, Gershwin didn't particularly like being on a Qantas flight, so I can't imagine how he would feel being on a rocket or a space aircraft. That would be quite terrifying for a pet, I would think, just probably because of the vibrations and the sound of the thing, and the time also that they would be confined would be traumatic for them, I would have thought.
Yeah, indeed. And I guess that you're actually separated when your cat's travelling, and they probably have strange people that are moving them onto the plane. Is that right?
Well, they're always in cargo holds for international flights, so I didn't get to see him. And I also thought that they would go downstairs and check on the pets, but the cabin crew don't go down at all, so they're kind of in a dark hold away from everybody, which might be a good thing because then hopefully they sleep and they don't get too disturbed on the flight.
What's your opinion about some of these animals that were used in the space program and sort of in the military as well, but more talking about sort of animals being used for reluctant travel that they haven't agreed to?
Well, it's a bit disturbing, really. I mean, as you say, they had no choice in the matter. So, I don't really think it's a particularly good thing. And I always wondered what happened to the Russian dog Laika, I think it was, that went into space. And I read recently that she died a week after the takeoff, so that's pretty upsetting.
Yeah, some of them did die during the program. Some of them came back and lived lives as kind of pet celebrities, but that's the positive side. Yeah. What kind of advice do you give to people on your websites and in your books about travel for pets?
Well, cats and dogs are very different animals, obviously. So the advice that I would give for people traveling with pets would be very different to people traveling with dogs. So I think if you're traveling with a cat, you would need to take a lot more precautions because they don't travel well. And if you do have a cat that travels well, then you're quite fortunate. Preparation, I guess, is key, and taking things that you know that the pet's going to need. What they need at home, they're going to need on the road. Yeah,
that sounds like good advice. One other thing I wanted to chat to you about: dogs as well as cats do seem to have special abilities to know when things are going to happen. They certainly know when it's feeding time. They know sort of when a storm's approaching or when it's time to go to bed. Certain smells, vibrations and sounds they're very sensitive to. Have you been aware that they have any kind of psychic abilities?
Well, yeah, definitely. A couple of years ago, there was a dust storm in Sydney, and Gershwin's an indoor cat, so he doesn't go outside at all. And he woke me up at probably about, like 5 a.m. It was just daybreak, and meowing and tapping me in my head to get me out of bed. And I looked outside, and the whole of Sydney was covered in this red dust, this like shrouded in red haze, and it looked like Mars. And we looked outside, and it was all of the dust from the red centre had blown it over to Sydney. And if Gershwin hadn't have woken me up, we would never have seen it. So I don't know if he had some kind of sixth sense that he knew that there was this dust storm that had taken place, but the fact that he was inside the whole time and was aware that it was going on outside was quite miraculous. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Dr. Rupert Sheldrake is doing some research into cats and their ESP abilities, and on other pets as well. And certainly we might find that you mentioned Mars there. We might find that there will be some cats on Mars. I mean, they're already training people for the first manned mission to Mars, and I'm sure animals will be coming later. But about these ESP abilities, I think you also mentioned that they can predict earthquakes. Did you ever feel that? I know you were in Japan and the earthquakes happen regularly there. Did Gershwin ever give you any indication there was an earthquake coming?
I mean, I didn't experience so many earthquakes when I was in Japan, but definitely he was very sensitive before there was some quite non-serious tremors. Yeah, he was a bit more hyperactive before it happened. And I've read a lot about the fact that cats are very sensitive to the Earth's vibration. And no one is really sure why that is, but they have some inbuilt warning detection, like I guess a kind of ESP, that they know that it's about to happen. So they kind of often run off from their homes. And I think a Californian geologist called Jim Birkland has done a lot of research about this and found out that there's a high number of cats that go missing before an earthquake because they want to escape the area that it might happen in.
Cats do seem to have some kind of ability to know something's going to happen, and you mentioned about cats going missing. Before one of the dogs was due to fly the next day on one of the space missions, he must have detected something and he actually escaped, and they never saw him again. So
wow, smart dog.
Yeah, smart dog. Also, there's been research into whether animals can detect when humans are ill or dying, and you, I think, also had an experience where you think your cat might have been able to detect some kind of spirit or ghost.
Yeah, that's right. When we were in Japan, he was constantly meowing. We took him to another apartment because we were moving out and we had to store our stuff somewhere. And he didn't know the apartment, but he found a closet and he sat outside the closet and meowed for about 24 hours in front of this closet. And it was completely empty. There was nothing in there. There was no reason. There was no animal in there or anything that should have disturbed him. So it was almost as if there was some, I don't know, like ghost or spirit in there that was bothering him. And he would not leave the side of this closet. So I don't know what was in there, but it was very interesting that he spent the whole time he was in this apartment just sitting, meowing incessantly at this thing, whatever it was in the closet. And I've read recently again that I think it's Burmese Buddhist monks believe that the breed, the Burman cat, carried the souls of departed monks. So there's quite a lot of spirituality and beliefs that cats do have some kind of sense with the spirit world.
And you've actually made a Zen cat video, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right. It was to raise money for the RSPCA here in Australia.
And what kind of things are in that video?
So it was just little tiny segments of things that cats do that are very spiritual, and short quotes from different philosophers or spiritual leaders about how we can lead probably a more spiritual life and how we can learn from our pets as well.
Great. And to actually learn more about pets and pet travel and some of the things we've talked about, where can people find this Zen video and also your website? Okay,
so if you want to have a look at the video, then you should go to maybe do the Google search of the RSPCA Cat Film Festival in Australia. There's also a Cat Film Festival in the USA that's very popular as well, but my one is the Australian one. And if you want to find out more about pet travel or tips for traveling with your pet, go to www.pet-friendlyaccommodation.com.au.
Excellent. And I'll try and put links underneath the Truth Sentinel episode on YouTube. So if you're interested in that, go and check out the link. And thanks very much for joining us today, Carla.
Thank you.
Next, let's go and chat to Anthony and see what he has for us this week. Anthony, welcome back to Truth Sentinel.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here, as always.
Where is here?
Here is actually Lviv in Ukraine. We've kind of swapped places a little bit. So you were here a little while ago, yeah?
Yeah, beautiful place.
It's extremely beautiful. I haven't been here for a couple of years, and you sort of forget just what a stunning place it is.
It is beautiful. I mean, the centre, especially the centre square with lots of nice architecture. Have you been enjoying sitting in the cafes and going to the restaurants?
Yeah, and look, I mean, it's the atmosphere here. It's quite strange actually, because this country is at war, but the atmosphere here at the moment is, I think, better than I've ever seen it. I mean, there's so much, celebration going on and so much energy in the city, which I really didn't expect.
Yeah. Well, meanwhile in Kiev, not so far away. Well, I mean, quite far away actually, but there's trouble going on. Have you noticed that in the news recently?
Yeah, it was mostly yesterday. Yeah, it was because the Ukrainian Parliament passed some legislation which is meant to grant some more autonomy to Luhansk and Donetsk. These are the eastern provinces where most of the fighting has been centered in this war. And when they had the Minsk Peace Conference in February, giving these two provinces more autonomy was one of the main conditions of the peace. And look, I think most people here in Ukraine support the idea because they don't want their country to be indefinitely at war. But unfortunately, you've got a hard line of right-wing nationalists who just say no concessions of any kind, because any concessions we make are sacrificing Ukraine's sovereignty to Putin. And these were the guys who clashed with police yesterday. You had one person killed. You had about 120 injured. There were grenades thrown. It was a mess, and it was all right outside the parliament in the centre of the city, which I know you know where that is. Yeah, it's unfortunate because I think these guys do have a point, but I mean at this point, stopping this conflict in the east is the most important thing. We've seen 7,000 people die and almost 1 million refugees. And by the way, I don't know if you read this in the news, but recently the UK Home Office reported that the biggest rise in the number of asylum applications in 2014 came not from Syrians but from Ukrainians. So really, this is now the fastest escalating refugee crisis in the world.
We may have to do an episode on refugees and the refugee crisis, because did you see also in Budapest in the last I think today actually, there was problems because they weren't allowing refugees into the station there.
I saw that. Yeah, it was police, right, who were blocking the refugees from getting onto a railway station. Is that what it was?
I believe so, and I believe some of them were Syrian, but I haven't really looked into the story much. But it does show you. I mean, I tweeted out basically on Twitter saying, these refugee crises with all these different countries at war is a result, in my opinion, of just the incompetence of world leaders, and yet people are continuing to vote the same kind of people back into power. And this thing's just you're gonna happen. You're gonna have all these people coming from different countries escaping violence. I mean, who'd want to hang around in a country if there was a chance you're going to be killed?
Yeah, well, I agree, and it's power politics as well. I mean, Ukraine is a perfect example. You've got a dazzling level of incompetence in Kiev by all accounts. I mean, I'm hearing here in Lviv that people on all sides are getting fed up with this government, like sending troops to the front line without any food or weapons. They just, off you go, go over there and get killed for us. And meanwhile you've got Putin playing the power politics angle and refusing to back down, mainly I think for his domestic audience. I don't even think it's necessarily about Ukraine for him. So I think you're right in that respect. But yeah, let's return to this in a future episode.
Definitely. I mean, one of the topics we're going to talk about today is just related in general to animals. And I know you've got a couple of stories you wanted to talk about.
Well, I do. This came up a couple of weeks ago when Hamas reported that they'd captured an Israeli spy dolphin off the coast of Gaza, and they said that the Israelis have been using these dolphins to spy on Palestinian naval commandos, which is quite interesting because actually this is an aspect of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict which I didn't know anything about, but apparently the confrontation is partly a naval one, and Hamas say that they confiscated a bunch of spy equipment which was mounted on the back of this dolphin, including a camera. There are also some reports saying that the dolphin had some kind of arrow firing device on it which could injure or kill a diver if the dolphin could discharge the device. Now, in the Western media, it's being reported with a bit of a sort of sarcastic tone. There's kind of this underlying kind of making a little bit of fun of Hamas, and I'll admit that the phrase spy dolphin is just inherently a bit funny, but actually I don't think we can dismiss the idea of spy animals, because we know that the intelligence services of various countries have been using animals in their operations for a long time,
including in Ukraine as well.
Well, that's right. Yeah. So Israel has been one of the countries that's been accused of this repeatedly. Though in some cases, the accusers are not entirely reliable. So you have, President Erdogan in Turkey saying that the Israelis send birds tagged with tracking devices onto Turkish university campuses to spy on their students, which I think is just one of those things he makes up for his public speeches, But yeah, they've been accused of this a lot, and as you say, they're not alone. You mentioned something before about a kestrel in Turkey, is that right?
Yeah, there was apparently a kestrel that was detained in Turkey on suspicion of being an Israeli spy, and it faced a lot of scrutiny. Apparently, I don't know what happened to it. That's not an isolated incident. Saudi Arabia arrested a vulture in 2011. They accused it of working for Mossad. I don't know if they directly accused it or whether they just said that they suspected it was part of Mossad. And in 2007, 14 squirrels were arrested on surveillance charges in Iran. I mean, whether these stories are totally true, I mean, I don't know. But also in Ukraine, wasn't there some dolphins that were sent to Russia after the Crimea episode?
That's right. Yeah. There was so one of the main cities on the Crimean Peninsula is Sevastopol, and there's a state aquarium which houses a special squad of combat dolphins, right? So in the Soviet era, that was all part of the USSR. When the Soviet Union collapsed, that sort of fell to Ukraine, and then of course Russia came in last year and took the peninsula, and now the two countries are squabbling over the dolphins. So the dolphin training program actually stopped after the Soviet collapse because of financial reasons. But the Ukrainians are saying they built a new facility and restarted the program in 2012. And apparently there's a new generation of dolphins that are already highly trained.
And dolphins can kill allegedly, can't they?
Well, the new generation apparently aren't trained to kill yet, but in Soviet times they were said to be capable of attacking enemy frogmen. Do you remember the days when we had enemy frogmen? Back when Sean Connery was James Bond?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so the Ukrainians are saying, give us back our dolphins, and the Russians are saying, no, you neglected them, so you're not getting them back.
Yeah, they had apparently knives fitted to their backs. So it makes you think twice about going on a holiday in Australia and swimming with dolphins, doesn't it?
Swimming with the dolphins, yeah, I swam with the dolphins in New Zealand, but none of them tried to knife me, fortunately. Maybe I had a lucky escape.
Yeah.
Just a quick advert break. Our email is scottsentinel9@gmail.com. Check out our past episodes. We've got lots of interesting guests, and you can find us on YouTube on 2 channels. We talk about conspiracies, mysteries, injustices, corruption, religion, war, peace. You can leave your own message and we can base our show around what you think. That's what we intend to do.
Help us find the truth in the news.
Find our YouTube channels. We've got all the episodes on there. Truth Sentinel and Truth Sentinel 1. Subscribe to both so you get notified of everything. Click on the About section, you'll find all the links. Have you got something you'd like to advertise? If it's truth related, honest and ethical, get in contact. You can help us, we can help you. We sell our own t-shirts with the greatest enemy of truth is blind belief in authority on the back. Just $20 plus postage and packing. Let us know your size, just send us an email, we can sort it out. We've also teamed up with trutht-shirts.com, and they make political t-shirts. Let people know where you stand, basically. Use the code TRUTH1, you get a 10% discount, and we get a donation. They make all kinds of political t-shirts, and they can customize them for you as well. If you've got any ideas for publicity stunts, get in contact. We need to escalate this channel, make it much bigger. We need your help. Please support us. Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of animals are used by the military and in various programs. Even the space program, and there was all those dogs that went up into space, and you've been looking into that as well, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right. This sort of we were talking about this before, and it came partly from my own experience. About 10 years ago, while I was living in Moscow, I went to the Museum of Cosmonautics, and there you can see the taxidermied corpses of 2 cute little doggies, cute little dogs called Belka and Strelka. Now, and these guys were the first dogs to successfully orbit the Earth and survive. That was in 1960, and they sort of became like pop stars in the Soviet Union, to the point where in 2010 a film was released in Russia called Star Dogs to commemorate their 50th anniversary. It's sort of a kid's adventure film starring these 2 dogs who went into space. So they're still remembered fondly today. And actually, one of them had a pup which was given as a gift to John F. Kennedy.
That's right, and I think it was kept in a golden cage, wasn't it?
It was something like that, yeah. And then she had pups, and they lived with the Kennedys for a short while. JFK used to call them the pupniks.
And wasn't it a bit of a kind of reluctant gift? It had a political point as well.
I think it was it was a bit of a political gift. I don't know if you remember the episode going back many years of Yes Minister, where the French president gives the Queen of England the gift of a puppy, and he does this to try and cause an international diplomatic incident. I think that episode may have been based on this giving JFK a puppy, because it caused all kinds of strife. But some of the puppy's descendants are still alive and living in the US. Anyway, so Bielka and Strelka, as I said, they went into orbit and they survived, much to the joy of their handlers. But they were just the most famous of really a great number of dogs who were involved in the Soviet space program. They were just rounded up off the streets around the Moscow Institute of Aviation Medicine in the 50s. They literally just went out into the streets and grabbed all the strays they could find and then submitted them to various stress tests to see which were the best potential cosmonauts. About 30 of them were sent up.
Wouldn't it be dogmanauts?
Dogmanauts, yeah. About 30 of them were sent up in between 1951 and 1957 in suborbital flights, and about half of those died. So some of them crashed, and there was one case where a parachute failed to open, so these two dogs just plunged to their deaths, and various other...
I was watching a documentary about that the other day. That was quite sad. I mean, some of the people involved were genuinely, upset about that, but I saw one of them explain that their bosses made them do it, people higher up, and they didn't even, some of the dogs, they didn't want to go into space. One dog actually escaped when he was due to, the day before he was due to be sent up on a rocket. Must have known what was coming, and he was replaced by a dog that had no training, and apparently this dog was exceptionally calm and did very well, and I think it did make it back alive.
I remember reading about that, actually. Yeah, there was a last minute replacement. Poor dog. but I mean, after that, like 6 years of sending them up, on missiles and all kinds of things. And they, sorry, not missiles, but rockets. It was a 50% death rate, but they pushed on anyway, and they sent up a dog called Laika in one of the Sputnik probes. She became famous later because she was the subject of a film called My Life as a Dog. Do you remember that film?
It's not on the top 10 of my most watched films. No.
Okay, it was sort of an indie hit kind of thing, but unfortunately, her life as a dog ended during the mission. She just died inside the rocket, partly of stress and partly of the temperature inside. And at the time, the Soviet authorities lied about this. They said she survived for a week, and then she died, peacefully. When the oxygen ran out.
Wasn't she being kind of tracked as well by the sort of members of the public, and it wasn't a very good sort of for publicity,
Well, this is why they lied, and it only came out in 2002. There were some new files released under Freedom of Information, or the Russian equivalent, showing that they'd made the whole thing up. She actually died within the first few hours of the mission, and it was a particularly agonizing death. But they left her up there for a week and spun a story because, obviously to avoid a PR disaster and like millions of crying children all around the Soviet Union. So all of that was pretty horrifying.
That does bring up a point, though, that's worth mentioning. Like, obviously, it's a difficult thing, I mean, to some of the space program and the things that we have now wouldn't be possible without some of these animals and pioneers, and it brings up the question of using animals in the military, in experiments and things like that. It's a difficult thing, really.
It is. I mean, the scientists of the day, as you said, many of them genuinely loved the animals they were working with, which is a point I want to take up a bit later. But it was justified by saying, this paved the way for Yuri Gagarin and the sort of main chapter of the Russian space program. So it is then a question of, like, is it worth killing a whole bunch of dogs in order to get one man up in a rocket?
Also, like you mentioned the dolphins earlier. Dolphins are everyone associates dolphins with peace and tranquility, and everyone knows they're intelligent, but it's kind of terrible that, we take these animals and we think, well, what can we do with this lovely, peaceful, intelligent animal? I know, let's strap a knife to its back and train it to kill someone.
Well, that's true. Though in fact, the science tells us that the dolphins are not as peaceful as they've been made out to be. They've really had that image thrust upon them, and they are capable of some quite unpleasant behaviour without our help.
Are you saying they're the warmongers?
No, I'm not saying they're the warmongers. We could talk about the sexual habits of dolphins, but I think that's probably another episode.
Yeah, it's not for now.
They're quite nasty at times, but yeah, I think it's a fairly common pattern in human affairs. In the way we use animals. At the time, we just seem to have this ability to ignore the ethical issues, and it only strikes us later when the harm is already done. There was an interview in 1998 with one of the guys who ran the Sputnik mission with Laika, where she died, and he said, the more time has passed, the more I regret it, because I just can't justify it in the name of scientific progress or whatever. But at the time, obviously, he could, and he did. And look, I know I've been talking a lot about Russia and Eastern Europe so far in this episode, which is, just because I'm fascinated with the history of that part of the world. But it wasn't only the Soviets doing this. At the same time as the Soviet space dogs, you also had the American space monkeys going up there. Some of whom I should say were basically strapped to ICBMs. So it was a bit of a scary time if you were unlucky enough to be an animal living near a research center. And we're still doing this even now. The fatality rate has gone down somewhat. But still, some of the animals that we use don't make it back. And also, it seems to me that the supposed benefits of these experiments are getting more and more marginal. You brought up the ethical dimension before, and I mean we're sending animals into space for just crazy reasons now. Just two quick examples. You remember the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster in 2003?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it burned up on re-entry air, and it was carrying a huge selection of living creatures, mostly insects and spiders, but some fish and other stuff as well. And I was in Australia at the time, and what I remember was there were Australian spiders on the shuttle, and people in Australia were actually quite sad and mournful about that, even though, if one of these spiders came into their house, a lot of them would probably go and get the broom or the cricket bat, and kill the crap out of the poor thing. But I mean, the question is, why were they on board the shuttle in the first place? And it turns out that there was a school teacher in Melbourne who'd received part of his education in a NASA-run facility, and he convinced them to let him run a competition for his students. The competition was design a NASA space experiment. So like this 13-year-old girl won the competition, and her experiment was to test the ability of spiders to build webs in zero gravity. Now, all the spiders in the experiment died when the shuttle disintegrated, and I just wonder, if the shuttle hadn't disintegrated and we got the results, would we have benefited in any way from knowing that spiders can build webs or can't build webs in zero gravity? I just don't see the benefit,
Personally, I wish they'd send all the spiders into space.
Fair enough. What about the lizards? Would you send them into space as well?
Well, they've already done that, haven't they? And they lost contact with them, didn't they?
They did, yeah. That was another Russian one, yeah. And John Oliver talked about this on his show. It was in 2013. They sent 4 female geckos and 1 male gecko into space on a satellite. And again, it was a silly reason. They wanted to test the effects of weightlessness on the sexual behavior of geckos. And the question was basically, will geckos have sex in space or not? Now, again, I just question the value of having this information. And look, the Russians have been sending up all kinds of animals in recent years. Snails, goats, flies, and always for these kind of marginal reasons.
And surely, isn't there a danger that or actually a great plot line for a movie. If a module with some geckos on board crashes onto another planet and they escape and start breeding, you're literally going to have a planet full of lizards, aren't you? And who knows what's going to happen to them in another environment? They might grow to 10 times the size.
And become like giant anacondas.
And then we send a manned mission to that planet, and it's the Alien movie.
Yeah, I guess so. This was meant to be a serious discussion about mankind's or humankind's.
You can't have a serious discussion when you bring up lizards having sex in space, though.
It's true. We were meant to be talking seriously about humankind's, willingness to exercise dominion over the animal kingdom. But now we've moved into giant lizards.
We have. I was going to say, as well as looking into space for lizards, lost lizards, and also people have been hunting for life on other planets. Some people say we haven't fully discovered some of the animals on this planet.
Well, that is true, and I think there are actually two aspects of that. We haven't discovered the full diversity of life on this planet, and we have had a couple of shocks in recent history. Most notable, I think, was when oceanographers started to explore ocean vents on the floors of I think it's the Atlantic Ocean. They first discovered them, and they found organisms living around these ocean vents that survived in temperatures upwards of 300 degrees Celsius and didn't need oxygen to live, which we had previously assumed was necessary for life. So these guys had no carbon in their system and didn't need oxygen. They lived completely on silicon, which makes them a completely different order of life. And with our current state of knowledge about the world, that could easily happen again many more times. We could discover that all the life we know is just one segment of the total of life on Earth.
Yeah, and there's lots of people have speculated that there's other creatures down deep in the ocean, and you've got creatures like Nessie and Bigfoot, and I thought we'd invite someone on to have a chat about that.
I would love that. This is you're leaning into the realm of cryptozoology now, which is a subject that absolutely fascinates me. Do we have anyone?
We do, and we're going to talk to him now. I'm just going to bring him in.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
So Hunter Shea writes about the paranormal, but he also seeks out the things that scare people and tries to write about real experiences and put them in fictional books. Some of his books are Forest of Shadows, Evil Eternal, Swamp Monster Massacre, Sinister Entity, Hellhole, The Waiting, Island of the Forbidden, the MONTAUK Monster, which we'd like to talk about a bit today, also the Dover Demon, I'd like to know what that is, and lots of other creatures, and we'll be talking about cryptozoology. So Hunter, welcome to the show, welcome to Truth Sentinel.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
What do you actually write about? What are most of your books about? Do you tend to write about animals that you think may exist, or do you sometimes just create ones afresh?
When I started out, I was kind of the ghost guy at Sam Hain when we started 4 years ago. But then I grew up on In Search Of, and when Monster Quest came back out, that came out. I loved it. So I've always loved cryptids. So. My first foray was Swamp Monster Massacre. That was about Bigfoot, or as they call them down in the South, skunk apes. And then I just, I'm hooked on cryptids at this point, and I like to take the myth of whatever cryptid is popular, maybe not as popular, say as the Dover Demon out there, and just try to build up the story and mix in fact and fiction and try to get the readers confused as they don't know what's real or what's not when it's over. But hopefully it scares them a little.
I know if I was Bigfoot, I think I'd prefer the name Bigfoot rather than skunk ape.
Definitely, but because they smell so bad down in the swamp. That's why they call them skunk apes, because they kind of smell like a skunk.
Right. Yeah. And could you give us a brief background as to what is a cryptid, and what is cryptozoology?
Well, cryptozoology, it's actually the study of unknown, or officially they say hidden animals. They call it, a lot of people call it a pseudoscience, but people who are into cryptozoology, a lot of them are actual zoologists because they can tell the difference between something that's normally found in nature and something that's kind of outside the norm. And it's about exploring different sightings, myths, and legends like a Bigfoot, the chupacabra, the Jersey Devil, or if we were talking about this 60 years ago, they would say the coelacanth, which is no longer a cryptid because now they have found coelacanths in the sea. So it's just
some of these have become generally accepted species. Yeah, like
Absolutely.
coelacanth is one. The okapi, I think, is another one. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, gorillas, not so long ago,
Really?
were a myth. Yeah.
Wow.
They were known as kind of like these wild, hairy creatures that were rarely seen up until, I got to say, maybe 130 years ago. I might be off on my timeline, but it was in the 1800s where they were still kind of they held a mythological kind of place in people's minds.
What about giant squids?
See, that's another one. Giant squids. Then now they're finding giant squids. So now we have to define what goes into the cryptozoology bucket. Like, how big does the squid have to be? Does it have to be something that they used to picture taking down ships, hundreds of years ago? But I mean, some of the ones they found in the last few years are just enormous.
What about the Loch Ness Monster? Have you ever looked into that at all?
I was obsessed with the Loch Ness Monster for about 5 years growing up. I mean, completely.
What stopped the obsession, or are you still obsessed?
You know what? First of all, there really aren't any new sightings of the Loch Ness Monster. I think it's just been so long, and a lot of the evidence, like that famous picture, was debunked. A lot of the famous images of the Loch Ness Monster, we've come to learn, are fake. So I don't know. If it was still popping up, maybe I might believe it a little more, or maybe it was there and it's since passed away. I'm not sure. I'd love to go out to Scotland.
What about the Montauk Monster? You've written a book, a fictional book, I believe, about that, but it is based on a true story, right?
Yeah, that image came out. It went viral online in 2008, and I remember I saw it because I'm not too far from Montauk in Long Island, New York, which is the easternmost tip of the island. And it was this bizarre creature. When I first looked, I said, "Oh, that looks like a pig and an eagle and a dog." I couldn't tell what it was. It was disgusting. And it wasn't a doctored photo. It was somebody was walking along the beach, took the picture, and somebody came by and took the carcass away. And the image alone piqued my interest. But then when I set about to write the book, and you find out all the weird things that go on in that area of Long Island, especially when you have the Plum Island Animal Research Facility a couple of miles off the coast where nobody can see what's going on. To me, when I was talking to my editor, the idea was, let's do a book where one of them washes up on shore and it's alive. And his idea was, well, what about if it's 100 of them? So it went from a tiny small town terror to swarming the island with these creatures that were created by scientists on Plum Island, which was in the beginning, and we talked earlier, it was the first director of the island was a former Nazi that was brought over from Project Paperclip after World War II, and his specialty was in germ warfare. And the guise of Plum Island was there to study various animal diseases to find cures, but it morphed into developing certain diseases as a weapon. The idea being that if you could introduce a certain disease that's unknown into the livestock of a particular country and it spreads like wildfire, well, then you starve the people down. You starve them out. And it makes it easier to, go in and conquer them. Yeah,
it wasn't that Eric Traub?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
It was.
That's an unbelievably sinister idea.
Yeah, and it's funny because if they weren't up to anything nefarious, why would they pick this island where nobody could ever see what was going on? And then when you read, there's a book about Plum Island, and you read how it was mismanaged, actually because it was a government owned. And the things that would get out of there, and how the seals and the doors weren't correct, and the island's battered by storms. And here in our area, when we blame Plum Island for the spread of Lyme disease and also encephalitis through mosquitoes. Supposedly they came from the island.
Is anyone able to get over to the island, or is it totally out of bounds?
It's out of bounds. I know right now there's supposedly nothing on it. I've heard that they've moved everything to the Midwest. They're trying to figure out. Homeland Security they owned it for a while. Now they're trying. So I know a private developer wanted to build something on it, and they declared the land as toxic. So literally nothing can grow on there.
Yeah, I mean, I think after September the 11th, Plum Island apparently started researching in biological weapons, and later on a whistleblower came out and voiced his or her concerns about the safety of the facility. I think he made the mistake by going to Senator Hillary Clinton, though. I mean, she's probably the best person to go and whistleblow to.
No, he's lucky he's still alive.
Well, we assume he's still alive.
No, but it's true. I mean, if you go post 9/11, and this is after there were two main lab buildings, and this is years after they had shut one of them down because they couldn't contain anything inside of it. So, I mean, they really didn't know what they were doing. It was kind of catch as catch can. It depended on budgets. And then budgets wouldn't come in 1 year, and then 1 year all of a sudden all the protocols aren't being followed, and they don't have the things that they need to contain these absolutely deadly viruses that they had in there, and all the animals that they were infecting with them.
Well, also, I mean, tying in with cryptozoology, there must be genetic experiments going on with animals, creating new sort of hybrid animals, and sometimes these animals must escape. As I mentioned earlier, a dog that was due to fly off to the moon or go into space escaped, and there's probably a fully trained astronaut dog in Kazakhstan somewhere now. But there must be escaped genetic animals, that are the result of genetic experiments. They may become the cryptids of the future.
I think about that all the time because we're in a time and place right now where they can mix and match DNA and do all kinds of things with living organisms. And yeah, I mean, 100 years from now there might be dozens of legends of creatures that were seen and never seen again because it was something that escaped and maybe just couldn't live on its own, or was hit by a car and slunk off into the woods. I mean, who knows?
Do you think that'll be a future novel for yourself, writing about an escaped creature like that?
Absolutely. I mean, the Montauk Monster was basically, these were escaped creatures, which in my concept of them, they were developed by the military to be hybrids of all types of animals, to look as terrifying, and you just release them into a war-torn area. First, seeing them would scare the heck out of them. They're vicious, and they're also loaded with disease. So if they bite you, you're infected, and it moves on to the next and the next and the next. So if I can dream that up, I'm sure there's some guy with better scientific knowledge than me who's already has a plan.
Yeah, some people say it was a raccoon, but it didn't look like a raccoon. It looked a very, very scary raccoon. If it was one of them, it had teeth, very sharp teeth.
Yeah, I live in the suburbs, and we have raccoons everywhere, and I've yet to see a raccoon that I would think would look anything remotely like that.
Well, maybe it was genetically spliced with a raccoon DNA, but it certainly didn't look like a common raccoon.
No, in fact, I met Lauren Coleman, who's the cryptozoologist who investigated and gave it the name, the Montauk Monster. And I had asked him one day, I said, do you think that really is a raccoon? Because he was one of the people who said it's a raccoon. And he just kind of gave me a sly look and said, well, could be.
I just wonder, so before we were talking about species that sort of started their lives, let's say, as cryptids, but then later became accepted species. So two questions. First of all, is that the kind of holy grail of the cryptozoologist, or are some cryptozoologists just not interested in that? That's the first question. And the second question is, are there any cryptids at the moment that you think in the future will become accepted species?
I do think that a legitimate cryptozoologist, I think their main goal is to take a legend and prove that it's real. Mm-hmm. Like somebody like Lauren Coleman, yeah, he'll report everything that's out there, but he doesn't believe everything that, he's just giving you, here are the facts, here's the type of sighting, here's what it looks like. And I've been to his museum in Portland, Maine. In fact, I just did a book signing for the Dover Demon there. And, it's a museum full of Bigfoot casts and coelacanths and Fiji mermaids.
I was going to ask you, actually, what is a Fiji mermaid?
P.T. Barnum, he created this. Basically, it looks like a very ugly mermaid. If you ever saw the movie There's Something About Mary, the old lady with the super tan, it looks like the top part of her body and the bottom part's a mermaid.
They could make a movie, couldn't they? The Ugly Mermaid. They made the Little Mermaid.
Exactly. I'd see that one. But yeah, I mean, even though he presents everything, he doesn't tell you that all of it is real. And I know he's been out in the field all his life, and I'm sure he would love to say, you know what, I did that chupacabra is real, and here it is, and you can test it with DNA, and we can cross this one off the list, and we can move this now into, this is just an animal that just exists here. Are there ones that are out there that will be proved one day? I believe so, and I would think you'd probably have to look to the deep seas for those types of animals. That's the most unexplored part of our world even encompassing the moon and the stars at this point. And I think if anything is going to be, if there's any monster that people have seen and classified as a monster that will be proven real, it's going to be found deep in the oceans.
This is why I don't actually like going swimming in the sea. You never actually know what's down there. I was swimming in the sea in Australia, and people started from a boat were pointing to me and started shouting, "It's coming towards you! It's 16 foot long!" And I started panicking. I actually just completely froze. I assumed it was a shark.
Right.
And then they said manta, and I have to confess, at the time I wasn't even sure what a manta was, so I still thought it was probably a manta shark, basically. And,
right.
But they were trying to tell me to put my head underwater and have a look at it, because it was one of those manta rays, and it had come up to see me, and they don't usually come up and mingle with humans so much. And but to be honest, I don't like to see any big dark shape coming towards me in the water. I don't even care if it's friendly. I just don't want to see it.
I don't blame you.
And I think that's where there's a lot of fear people have of things in the sea, like sharks and sea monsters. And you've got lots of stories in the past of with Captain Nemo and these giant squids. Have you written about sea creatures?
It's funny because I just finished writing a book for Severed Press about sea monsters. I literally, when I say just finished, I mean last week I finished it, and I handed it off to them. So, and I also did. It's funny because as I was doing that, another publisher said, "We're doing an anthology on lake monsters or sea monsters. Do you want to do a story for that?" So, I've had the Summer of Sea Monsters, which has been fantastic, and it was great because I think it was 2 weeks ago I was looking, there was some deep sea oil drilling going on. They always have, they're recording what they're doing. And they had, I don't know if you've ever heard of the flying spaghetti monster, that pseudo-religion, joke religion.
I've heard of it. I've never actually seen one, but I have heard of it, yeah.
Way deep, thousands of feet deep down, there was this creature, this undulating creature with, it looked like big spaghetti arms everywhere floating around there. And I mean, if I saw that, I'd come up next to me in the water, I think I'd drop dead. It was terrifying looking. But I mean, that's if you go, there are places you can go online to look at things, different creatures from the sea that they're finding, and they have great video of these things, and it's creepy.
Yeah, I mean, do you find that do you think the success of horror books about sea creatures and monsters, where do you think it comes from? What do you think people find appealing about it?
I think a lot of people are scared of the water, and because we don't know what's down there, and you can't breathe in the water. Like if I'm scared of my house right now, well, I'm pretty sure I can run out of the house and get to safety. If something happens to me on the high seas, I'm in trouble.
That's true, yeah.
Where am I going to go?
In a plane, yeah.
Right, exactly. So I think that's really what terrifies people. A lot of people I talk to, they're terrified by two things: things that lurk in the water, and demonic possession. For some reason, those are the two things that kind of really freak people out.
And spiders.
Well, yeah. If you're my daughter, flies.
Flies, really?
Oh my God! It was really rough taking her to the woods in Maine for 2 weeks. There's a lot of flailing around and screaming.
Yeah, I mean some of the insects and the creatures we've got around us would be scary if they were enlarged. I mean, imagine. I was talking to my friend the other day, well, a few weeks ago. I don't know why we were talking about this, by the way, but we were talking about like a mosquito, and if it had been genetically enlarged, so it was just huge, like the size of a car or something, it would go up to a person and just literally with one suck just completely turn them into a husk.
You're exactly. I'm thinking of what was it, Jeff Goldblum, when he was vomiting on people and melting them down so he could suck them up.
Yeah. Life can get pretty boring in London. I don't know why we were talking about that, but Anthony, any more questions about cryptids?
Yeah, the gigantification thing. I mean that's another branch of cryptozoology as well. I mean, I know there are people out there looking for the giant boa in Peru and so on. I find it a little difficult to cross the threshold and believe that there's a 140 meter long boa. I don't find it difficult to believe that there's a giant squid that's 3 times larger than any of the ones we've found so far. But the giant boa for me strains credibility a little bit. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
It would need a tremendous food source. I mean, the bigger something is, the more food it needs, the more room it needs to roam, the harder it is for it to hide. So, I mean, I'm sure there are big of anything. I mean, there's giant people. Look at the NBA here. Some of these people are enormous. They're not anywhere near the norm. But when they say something like a 140-foot snake, I'm sure that's just, if they saw a big snake, they're just, terrified, and they're just coming up with a number. I think they're just exaggerating it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Hunter, do you try and tap into, when you're writing your books, do you try and think of things that people are scared of? Like, do you try and tap into those fears? Because I'm thinking of snakes and spiders. Do you write about them as well, or do you try and tap into what makes people scared of things? I'm scared of spiders, I'll admit it. Right. I don't know why. I mean, I guess it's the way they walk, and it may have been learned behaviour. If, when I was younger, seeing my mother scream when she saw a spider. But do you try and tap into that when you're writing about animals and creatures?
You know what? I try to put people in situations where they're vulnerable. So it's not that it could be anything at that point. If somebody's in a very vulnerable position and you introduce something into that scene that doesn't belong, that's enough to scare the heck out of them. So really, that's what I look for, the vulnerability of the character, either something within them or something in their environment, and then I'll send some little nasty around their way to really, scare them. I've had some people tell me, one of my ghost books, I did a scene with a girl in the bathroom, going to the bathroom, and something happening to her there, and they were like, I didn't want to pee for a week after I read that. Because like every time I went, I just kept thinking, is there something in here with me? So it's that whole thing of just putting you at your worst, where there's not much you can do, and you're in a bad position, and introducing something that's going to terrify you.
When looking into some of your work, I came across the Portland Cryptozoology Museum. I believe you've been there. What kind of things do they have there?
Oh, it's a small museum. It's 2 rooms, but it is packed from floor to ceiling. With they have displays of Bigfoot and Yeti casts, and lots of replicas of. He has a 7-foot tall Bigfoot that you can take pictures next to. He's got a big Jersey Devil hanging from the ceiling. Displays on the Dover Demon and the Montauk Monster and the Chupacabra. I mean, for a place that's 2 rooms, I could spend a weekend there just exploring everything. And the best part is that you go a couple times a week. Lauren Coleman is there, and he's the guy who's gone and explored a lot of these creatures. So he's there to talk to you about it and show you around the museum. So for a place like me, that's like the greatest. A guy like me, that's the greatest place in the world. I
think for a lot of people, those kind of places are really interesting to have a look at. Can you tell us a bit about the Dover Demon, what it is?
Yeah, the Dover Demon, it's a creature. When I was talking to Lauren, I said, what kind of cryptid doesn't get the love it should get, the recognition? And he said, one that's always kind of bothered me was the Dover Demon. It was a creature that, if we saw it today, we would say, "Oh, it's an alien." It was spotted over a course of 2 nights by several groups of teenagers in the town of Dover, Massachusetts, in 1977. They didn't publicize their sightings. They just went home. They told their parents, and it wasn't until weeks later that one of them, who grew up to be an artist, he did a drawing of what he saw, and it was a bipedal creature with a large head, big orange eyes. He said the flesh looked almost pebbled and the color of like a Fred Flintstone in the comics pages. This was 1977. And this was months before Close Encounters of the Third Kind came out, and that iconic alien image. And, they descended on the town. The cryptozoologists were there. MUFON was there trying to figure out what those teens saw. But it was weeks after the event, so there really wasn't much to find. But the strange thing about it was, when you investigate these things, usually years later, somebody's going to recant their story. And this is, 35 years later, and nobody has recanted what they said they saw.
It's very interesting that you brought up, we would see it now and think it was an alien. I often wonder about those kinds of things. I mean, could you have the same kind of creature appearing to, one group of people in say the Middle Ages who conclude that it's a demon, then another group of people in the 19th century, the age of spiritualism, who conclude that it's, a ghost or whatever, and then another group of people in the late 20th century who conclude that it's an alien. So it's our culture that's kind of characterizing these creatures when we come across them.
That's a perfect insight, and it's kind of exactly what I was thinking about when I started writing the book, because I was trying to find an explanation for what it is, because I have to make something concrete in it. And I definitely brought that into the story itself. These things. I'm just saying it probably wasn't a 2-night event. It's something that's been around a lot longer, and it's not what anybody thinks it is. But maybe a little bit of what everybody does. Does that make it ambiguous enough?
I was thinking as well, for a lot of people, things like ghosts and demons are far scarier, because it seems to be that they can actually get inside you, as opposed to just being something physical. In the case of ghosts, they can actually, get inside you, and you can't really deal with that. And I think that's where the fear comes from in some cases. Of
that
ghosts.
Plus they could be anywhere.
Yeah.
Like, I'm pretty sure in New York I'm not going to run into a Bigfoot, so that's not going to be my fear. But in my home, I could have something in my bedroom with me at night. Who knows?
Yeah, and the other thing is, when people, if somebody sees something, or sees a cryptid or a ghost or a demon, they're often not believed and ridiculed. And in some cases, there's multiple witnesses. I'm thinking of the Mothman here. Have you ever looked into the Mothman case?
Yeah, that to me is one of the strangest cases that's ever recorded, because it's not just the creature. In that 1-year period, there were men in black, there were ghosts, there were UFOs, there were strange things going on with electronics all throughout the town of Point Pleasant. I mean, if you read John Keel's book on the Mothman, it's mind-blowing what was going on there.
Yeah, I mean, there was multiple witnesses in different locations. Something definitely strange was going on there. I don't know how people can. People often try and explain it away by saying it's a raccoon, or it's. I mean, sorry, but that was with the Montauk Monster. But with the Mothman, it was things like it's what was it, an eagle or a bird, or something like that. I mean, I think most people do know the difference between a bird and an 8-foot tall thing with wings.
That would chase down cars.
Yeah.
So, I was just in a place where there were eagles and hawks, and you would not confuse them for a strange creature like a Mothman.
I was going to ask you also, you do a Monster Men podcast. What actually do you do on that?
Aside from drink heavily before we turn on the camera, we actually, Jack and I, we used to work together, and we would, at lunch or after work, we would just always talk about, monster movies and what we read and things like that. We found out that we grew up loving all the same things, except he grew up in a better neighborhood than I did. So when my first book was coming out, we decided to do this show where we would just sit down and kind of talk about a specific topic each. We used to do it every 2 weeks. And now, we talk about, we'll do an episode of movies, how great movies you can find on Netflix for free, or the latest horror novel releases, or we're actually going to do a special on Wes Craven on Thursday. So I think we're up to almost 90 episodes. It's a lot of fun. It's a video podcast, so there's a lot of editing that goes into it. So I wish we could do more of it, but Jack is the editor and he has to work too. So
everyone has to work, unfortunately.
Yeah, why can't we get paid a lot to doing for doing the fun stuff?
Exactly. Yeah, I don't know.
The eternal question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is indeed. Where can people go and find out more about your books and about the Monster Men podcast? And do you have any website or anything?
Yeah, it's if you go to huntershea.com, it has everything, my new releases for my books, which are The Dover Demon, that just came out today, actually. And also the links to our Monster Men page and our YouTube channel for Monster Men, and I have my blog there, Twitter, Facebook. You can find everything there.
Okay, well, I just wanted to thank you myself, just for thanks for coming on, Hunter, and talking to us. And if you're available at some point, we'd love to ask you to come back, and maybe we'll talk about a specific creature like Loch Ness monster or something like that, in the future.
You want to talk monsters anytime, and I'm there. That's why I'm a Monster Man.
Excellent.
Okay, thanks very much, Hunter. It was really fun to talk to you.
Oh, thank you very much. This was great.
See you.
All right, great. Thanks a lot, guys.
Okay.
Thanks, Hunter. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Talk to you soon.
Remember, you can find us at www.truthsentinel.co.uk or look for Truth Sentinel with Scott on YouTube, and you'll find all our episodes there. So that's www.truthsentinel.co.uk. Episodes coming up on MH370 and many other topics. Thanks for listening. Bye.